Whispers in the Walls is a collection of original ghost stories that range from haunting to humorous, spun from the minds of the writing team at Tennessee Horror News. These ghostly yarns will transport you to small town America into the depths of the past and neighboring dimensions. In these pages, you will find haunted objects, vengeful spirits, and other worldly horrors. What you won't find is anything you've ever read before. Includes new original stories from Isaac Thorne, Bryce Gibson, Dan Lee, Yeti, Angela McNichols, and Tyler Dean. Available at Lulu.com, Amazon, and Barnes & Noble. Get your copy now.
Good evening, spooks and spookcats. Count Drahoon here, and I'm excited because tonight we begin part 3 of Whispers in the Walls, the anthology ghost story book put out by our friends at Tennessee Horror News. And tonight we are reading the third story, entitled She Was a Work of Art, by one of the founders of Tennessee Horror News, my dear friend Yeti. But before we begin tonight's broadcast, there's a few castle-keeping notes that I do need to make you aware of. A lot of the stories that you will read here in Whispers in the Walls, they may not be suitable for children. So if you do have little ones, this particular series may not be the best thing for them to listen to. However, that does not take away it does not take away from the impressiveness of this book. These are all very talented local ghostwriters, but it may not necessarily be a kid-friendly series, but needless to say, we will get back to that at some point later this year. But for now, we've got to get through some really hardcore horror, as it were. But I just wanted to be upfront about that. But of course, if you're okay with blood and guts and gore and ghosts and ghoulies, well, tonight's your night. In addition to that, there's a few links that I need to make you aware of. Of course, we have links to the Tennessee Horror News website. Feel free to go there and check out the various programs that the Tennessee Horror News guys have out there, including the Horror Basement podcast, Beyond the Basement, and various other horror movie reviews that you can watch from other contributors of the network. Of course, in case you didn't already know, I myself have my own show called Count Drahoon's Feature of Fright. There are several different ways to watch it. Right now we have our latest episode out. It is part 2 of our radio theater adaptation of House on Haunted Hill. It's a little bit of a twist from the original 1959 film. You see, all of my voice actors, which I call the Merry Mob of Mayhem, they put their own twist to the characters that were originally portrayed in the films. You see, they decided to play their part using their best celebrity impersonation. So I hope you enjoy that. And well, with the exception of the lead, our dear friend Will Lasley, who did portray the Frederick Lauren character almost exactly like Vincent Price. Pretty much exactly, except there is a striking difference between Will Lasley and Vincent Price. You can very easily tell them apart. I mentioned Will because tonight he is premiering a little theatrical endeavor of his own, which he calls Rough Cuts and Gems. It's a showcase of different Broadway tunes that if you're a fan of theater, I think you will thoroughly enjoy. But Will has been a member of the Merry Mob of Mayhem for quite some time, and we here at Count Drahoon's Feature of Fright like to promote our own. So we have the link towards the bottom of the show, so be sure to check out his show after this. And, of course, you can watch other episodes of Count Drahoon's Feature of Fright featuring Will Lasley at the links below. There's a link to my podcast page, featureofright.com. There's also a link to the Marion County Messenger, where a lot of our videos are on display. And we also have a link to Trauma Now, Of course, that is the official streaming service of Troma Entertainment, which we will be debuting there sometime this year. So go ahead and get yourself a subscription. That's one way to help out the show. Another way, of course, is to go to our Audible link to set yourself up a membership there. You help us out by putting some pennies into the coffer, and you get your first few credits free when you sign up for Audible through that link. It helps us out quite a bit. And of course, you can buy some of my merch as well as Tennessee Horror News merch as well. I have the links for our TeePublic stores at the bottom as well. Now that I've got all that out of the way, let's get right into the heart of the matter, spooks and spookettes. Hopefully you won't feel the need to drive a stake through it. So here we go. Tonight, listen to the Yeti, my friend Yeti, and his short story, She Was a Work of Art. My name is Frank Williams, and I was what I like to call a hopeful skeptic. I always felt like there was more of this world than what we see. I just wanted some kind of proof. A single experience is all I needed to convince me that there was something beyond our physical existence. My rational mind outweighed my desire to believe. It started when I was young. All the neighborhood kids had ghost stories about their grandma's house. Everyone's cousin's friend's uncle had a ghost in their home at some point. Even if most of the stories seemed dubious at best, I was hooked. I started checking out books of ghost stories from the library, and my fascination grew. After years of wishing that my house was haunted or hoping to catch a glimpse of a ghost at a friend's slumber party, I decided to seek out an experience. The summer before I started high school, some friends and I made our way to the local haunted house. It was an old abandoned place on the edge of town. The roof had collapsed in spots, and it seemed as though the lawn had never been mowed. It was the kind of place that looks like it would be a haven for wandering spirits. We didn't see anything but a couple of opossums and an impressive collection of cobwebs. But that night changed things for me. The combination of anticipation and fear I felt while exploring those ruins was like nothing I had ever experienced. I decided I had to go and seek out more places like that one. So I spent the next few years chasing ghosts and that feeling. When I got my first car, I went to every haunted spot I could find. It didn't matter if it was an old graveyard or some half-collapsed barn. I would be there, searching and hoping. When I got my own place and had to keep a steady job, I started planning my vacations around trips to paranormal hotspots. I've been to the Belvich Cave, the Winchester Mystery House, and just about every other condemned hospital and Civil War graveyard in between. Some of those places made my skin crawl, but I still never experienced anything concrete. Through it all, my interest never waned. I was in my mid-20s when the internet became a part of everyday life. I quickly found message boards full of like-minded people. It also became easier to discover and research new hotspots to visit. I was able to read small-town lore from around the country. I never found a few new places close to home. I even found a few new places close to home. The internet was also my gateway to a whole new world of first-hand accounts of the paranormal. It was in these ghost stories that I heard about people buying and selling cursed or haunted objects in online marketplaces. At that point, I looked at eBay like an electronic yard sale and didn't have much interest in it, but this was different. It was like having a vast oddity shop right on my desk. Not long after learning about this that I started searching through online listings for something haunted. I thought that if I could get my hands on something that was active, I could get the experience that I craved without traveling around the country. If I had something haunted in my own home, I could spend time with the phenomena and try to understand it. I could take my research of the paranormal to a very real and practical place. The prospect excited me, but I wasn't naive. I scrolled past several boxes and jars that the seller claimed to have used to trap ghosts. Over the years, I had learned how to spot outright hoaxes, and the auction sites were full of those. At the end of my first night of hunting, I ended up buying a small bronze statue. It looked like some kind of bull-faced god with long horns, a muscular body, and an intricately carved staff. The seller claimed that the statue contained the spirit of an ancient warrior. They went on to claim that when the statue was put on display, it would cause strange things to happen. The listing talked about moving furniture, slamming doors, and strange voices in the night. At the very least, the figure would look great above my TV set. As you could have probably guessed, the statue was buck. If it contained the spirit of some ancient warrior, I couldn't tell. This didn't stop me from collecting more items from various online outlets. I would buy things that I liked, and even if the claims were false, I would have the benefit of sprucing up my apartment. If nothing else, it was a fun way to collect unique home decor with interesting stories. When social media got big, it centralized the various paranormal communities. Members of several of the message boards I frequented moved to Facebook groups. Some of these catered to wider interests and had thousands of members, while others had a narrow focus and small membership. One of those smaller groups was just for collectors like me. It was in that group that I met Kevin. He and I had the same taste in aesthetics. We also had some of the same one-of-a-kind pieces. Because of these similarities, Kevin and I ended up doing business from time to time. The guy was a shrewd negotiator, but was fair but never took a loss in a deal. This is why our last conversation seemed so out of character for him. It had been a long week at work, and I was glad to be relaxing at home, having a few beers and watching a movie. I had just gotten comfortable, and my lazy weekend had officially started when my phone buzzed. It was Kevin. I have something that I think you'd like. I wasn't in the market for anything new until just now. Let's see it. The guy had a great sales pitch. I'll give him that. The reply that followed was a picture of a painting. It was set in an ornate, dark-colored wooden frame worked with flowers and vines that twisted in on themselves to form what looked like half-hidden runes and symbols. The frame was a work of art in of itself. The canvas it held made the masterfully carved frame look like a child's scratchings in comparison. A young woman smiled defiantly from the canvas. Her wide-set, icy blue eyes seemed as though they were boring directly into my soul. The woman's silvery blonde hair fell over her bare shoulders, all but concealing the rope around her throat that held her fast to the rough-hewn wooden pole behind her. The woman's hair reflected the fire that was surely being stoked at her feet. She was the most captivating woman I ever laid eyes on, in the flesh or on canvas. It wasn't just that it was a picture of a beautiful woman. The attention to detail and precision in the painting was like nothing I had ever seen. I zoomed in on her eyes and could see the faint reflection of silhouetted figures holding torches and what looked like rough farm implements. I could see the individual fibers in the rope, as well as errant hairs breaking away from the silvery waterfall on the woman's shoulders. Even her eyelashes were defined. It was as if someone had taken a photograph just before the flames of execution engulfed her. The whole thing was as beautiful as it was unsettling. This is a beautiful piece. What's the story behind it? This was too good to pass up. I went back to staring at the photo, picking out more and more tiny details. When the reply came, I jumped and nearly dropped my phone. It's supposedly a Scandinavian witch who was burned somewhere in Europe. Her spirit is trapped in the painting. The symbols on the frame help hold her in. Apparently, she was the high priestess of a cult that was into some pretty dark magic. This wasn't the run-of-the-mill Nordic witchery. The story goes that it was painted by one of her descendants decades after her death. Whoever painted it was in the same cult as the woman in the painting. She summoned her ancestor spirit and trapped it in there. Supposedly, she was able to communicate with the spirit for advice and whatnot. I didn't care if it contained a spirit or not. It was an incredible painting, and if a cell phone picture looked that good, the real thing would be a sight to behold. There was a perfect spot for it on my living room wall. I'm definitely interested. Are there more details available, or is that all you know about it? Have you had any experiences since she has been in your collection? There's a printed version of the history in the box. As far as experiences, nothing significant has happened. She makes me feel uneasy, like she's constantly watching me. I've had some pretty vivid nightmares since I brought her home. Sounds like I'd be doing your sleep schedule a favor by taking her off your hands. How much? Is your payment info the same? No worries on the payment. She's already on her way to you. Call it a gift. I stared at the message, completely dumbfounded. I was grateful, but somehow it didn't feel quite right. Wow, thank you so much. She'll be in good hands. I have to ask why, though. Honestly, she's not very popular in my house. My wife hates looking at her, and my dog growls at her every time he walks into the office. She was just oozing negative energy and causing tension. I've never gotten this kind of reaction to anything else I've brought home. I knew you'd fall in love with the painting as quickly as I did. Don't think I won't bring this up next time we do business, though. Don't worry, I'll keep it in mind. I really appreciate it. I'll let you know when she arrives. No reply came after that. Kevin probably had things to attend to, I assumed. I restarted the movie and I was watching and finished my beer. This night had turned out better than I had imagined it would, but it ended about 20 minutes later when I fell asleep sitting on the couch. When I woke up, it was late and I was covered in sweat. My heart was racing and every muscle in my body was tense. Even sitting there, staring at my faintly glowing TV screen, I couldn't remember what dreams had sent me into a tailspin. All I knew for sure is that my body was flooded with adrenaline. I didn't sleep much more that night. It was Wednesday when I came home to find a tall, flat, painting-shaped box leaning against my door in the hallway. All of the stress of work was forgotten in an instant. I could feel the smile spread across my face as I got closer to the door. My pace and pulse both quickened. She was finally here. I unlocked my door and grabbed the box to take it inside and almost fell through my door. The box was heavier than I had imagined it would be. I handled several paintings of this size before. I don't think those paintings combined weighed as much as this one. I regrouped and wrestled the box into my apartment and lifted it gently onto my kitchen table. One of the first things I noticed after removing the piece from the box was that it seemed the frame was carved from a single piece of wood. I wasn't sure, but I assumed it was mahogany due to its color and weight. The vines were carved in relief to look as though they wrapped around the entire frame. A few of their various intersections formed runes. Almost hidden behind the vines and their leaves, I could see what looked like Theban writing or witch script and other symbols with which I am still not familiar. The craftsmanship was impeccable. It looked like an artisan's masterwork. I had never seen an actual ghost prison before, but I assumed this is what one would look like, skillfully made with an air of mystery. The only thing that could possibly outshine the frame was the painting it contained. I had originally thought the painting looked like a photograph, but even that didn't do it justice. To look at this painting up close was to stand face to face with the beautiful, defiant woman herself. The thought of being caught in her gaze made my palms sweat and my mouth dry. It was the kind of glare that has revenge written all over it. Before I thought she was gorgeous, but now I could see the danger that lived in the icy blue lakes of her eyes. Defiant wasn't the right word. She was ferocious. After some time and considerable effort, the painting was glaring down at my living room from behind the couch. She looked perfect there, like a witch queen looking down on her coven. The tones of the wood matched almost perfectly with the leather of the couch. It was like I had commissioned a piece just to hang on that wall. I was overjoyed. It was then that I remembered the story of the painting and hurried back to the box. Under the layers of packing material, I found a manila envelope. I took it, sat on the couch, and said half-jokingly to the painting, "Let's see what you're all about, shall we?" The woman's name was Elizabeth Agmundsdottir, and she was a grandmother at the time of her death. She lived in a small parish known as Torksaker in the mid-17th century. On one cold autumn day, Elizabeth and 70 of her fellow townspeople were marched to a place known as the Mountain of the Stake in the center of the parish. There, most of them were beheaded and burned for the crime of witchcraft. Most of the people who died on the Mountain of the Stake that day were no more witches than they were IT specialists. Elizabeth was different, though. The priest had a grudge against her. He was sure that it was her who caused his brother's death and the miscarriage of his niece. He knew as sure as he knew his own name that Elizabeth was a practitioner of the darkest of dark magic. For her crimes against God and the people of the parish, she would pay a hefty price, and he would gladly collect that debt. She would not be given the mercy of the headman's swift axe. This witch they would burn over a slow fire. The thing is, the priest was right. She caused famines in other parishes, the miscarriages of pregnancies, the deaths of children and adults alike, and was even said to have seduced a nun from a nearby convent. Her ageless appearance and otherworldly beauty, they claimed, were gifts from the dark gods she worshipped. She didn't scream, cry, or swear vengeance like some of the others had done. She would not give them the satisfaction. From the time she was apprehended until her spirit left her body, she smiled silently at her accusers. The same smile, I assume, that she now wears in the painting. They gathered round her stake, holding crosses, weapons, and torches, just in case the powerful witch tried to somehow escape. She did not. She accepted her death silently and with dignity. She had no fear of death or pain. In the early 19th century, an unnamed descendant summoned Elizabeth's spirit and trapped it in the painting. Not much else is known about her. By the time I had finished reading the story, my stomach was growling. I tossed the small stack of papers on the coffee table and made my way to the kitchen to heat up some leftovers. It was like Elizabeth's gaze followed me as I walked across the room. No matter where I went in my apartment, if I could see her, she was staring at me. I could feel it. I wrote the feeling off as the power of suggestion combined with exhaustion. Things went normally for the next few days. Elizabeth stared at me while I went about my daily routine of getting ready for work in the morning and winding down in the evening. After about a week of having the painting in my living room, I had another nightmare. I woke up covered in sweat. My chest hurt, and it felt like there was huge weight crushing my ribs, making it almost impossible to breathe. I knew that I was having a panic attack, but had no idea what brought it on. I just knew that I was hot and needed something to drink. As I made my way to the fridge, I made a mental note to ask Kevin about his nightmares. Maybe Elizabeth had something to do with them. Maybe it was just me. By the time I got home from work that evening, I had all but forgotten about the panic-inducing dream from the night before. If it weren't for the painting making me feel as though I was being watched as I walked through my apartment, I may have completely forgotten it. Before it left my mind again, I decided to fire off a message to Kevin to ask if his nightmares had stopped after shipping me the painting. When I pulled up our conversation in the app, I was met with a message that informed me that I could no longer reply to the conversation. Kevin had either blocked me or deactivated his Facebook profile again. I just shrugged it off and continued into my bedroom, deciding I would just give him a call if the nightmares didn't stop. At least 5 nights a week, I follow the same routine. I come home from work, walk into my bedroom and drop my keys and miscellaneous pocket clutter in a supposedly haunted valet tray on my nightstand and take a shower. Only after I've had a nice relaxing shower do I do anything else, which is why I was shocked to find my keys missing the next morning. Everything else was in the tray where it belonged. Pocket knife, change, ID badge for work, and the receipt from lunch were all laying right where I had put them. My keys were nowhere to be found. A stream of obscenities tumbled from my mouth as I looked around my room. I checked in on the dresser, searched the bathroom, and spent some time with a flashlight searching under my bed. It was as if they had just vanished. After getting elbow deep in my couch, I decided to have a frozen breakfast sandwich, call a cab, and worry about the location of my keys after work. The last thing I needed was to be late for work. My morning took a turn when I opened the freezer door to retrieve my breakfast. Something caught my eye. It was my simple black keychain poking out from behind some cream spinach. If they had just been sitting on the shelf or even in the ice bucket, I would have made myself believe that I had just put them there by accident. I reached slowly into the back of the freezer, a feeling of dread falling over me like a blanket. The seconds it took me to retrieve my keys felt like hours. I approached them like someone would approach a venomous snake or some other dangerous animal. Slow and steady, no sudden movements, my breath trapped in my chest. I snatched my keys from behind the spinach, slammed the freezer door, and was on my way out of the apartment. Breakfast could wait. After years of seeking out strange experiences, one would think that I would be prepared for something like this. Honestly, I thought I was ready for anything the other side could throw my direction. I was wrong. The incident with my keys left me pretty shaken. Unlike the panic-inducing nightmare, this would not leave my mind. I couldn't keep myself from trying to justify how they had wound up in the freezer. Every time the thought entered my mind, that feeling of dread started to seep in all over again. For the first time in my life, the thought of going home put me on edge. By the end of the week, things were going back to normal. I was finally able to push the incident to the back of my mind. Since nothing else happened, I reasoned that I had been sleepwalking. It seemed like a plausible explanation. I had been having nightmares, so it makes sense that I was having other sleep disturbances as well. Maybe my subconscious was telling me to take some time off of work. That Friday night, I went through my nightly routine and spent a few hours unwinding before going to bed. I woke up sometime in the early morning hours, once again covered in sweat and on the verge of hyperventilating. This time, though, I could remember some of the dream. I was in the middle of a circle of angry villagers. They were all hurling what I could only assume were insults at me in a foreign language. Of the villagers, and a clergyman's garb stood between me and the crowd, reading from a weathered-looking sheet of paper. My throat hurt and I was parched. I didn't go back to sleep that night. A sense of impending doom wrapped tightly around me. Every time I closed my eyes, I could see them standing there, yelling, judging, furious. Instead, I brewed a pot of coffee and decided that I would try to get to bed early the next night. I sat with Elizabeth's eyes burning into the back of my skull as I flipped through the channels, looking for something to pass the time. Just before noon, I called my job and told them that I would be... oh, excuse me. I called my job and told them that I would be taking the next week off. I had plenty of vacation time to cover it and told them I was dealing with a family emergency. The truth of the matter was that for some reason I didn't want to leave my house. It felt like the only safe place in the entire world was in my living room. Even though part of me suspected that she was connected to the nightmares and the misplaced keys, I felt safe in Elizabeth's gaze. I couldn't make eye contact with her for fear of the hate that lived in the depths of her pupils, but I felt as though I needed her to watch over me. Deep down, I knew something strange was afoot. I hadn't dealt with anxiety since my early 20s, and it had never been like this before. I don't know what you're doing to me or what you want from me, but I wish you would let me know. It was then that I thought that I felt a hot wind come from behind me, like a dry breath from a large creature that carried the faint smell of smoke and sweat. Along with his wind came a barely audible chuckle. There was no mirth in that small and quiet laugh. It dripped with contempt and malice. I closed my eyes to steady my nerves, silently reminding myself that I was exhausted and sleep deprivation would play all manner of tricks on my mind. All I knew for sure was that I needed to do something, anything at all. I kept myself busy tidying up, and when there was no more of that to do, I laid on my couch to catch up on some reading. Sometimes in the early evening I began to doze. I tried to blink away the sleep, telling myself I would just finish the chapter I was reading. Then the strangest thing happened. I could have swore I heard a short laugh from above the couch as I was startled awake by the weight of a hardback copy of The Stand crashing on my face. I was bone-tired and on the verge of sleep at the time, but it seemed so real. I didn't have time to really think about it, though. My body was going to rest whether I liked it or not. The last thing I remember is looking for my bookmark. The next morning, I woke up to find myself on the couch, my head on my pillow, and my blanket wrapped around me. It was also dark in the room, and my book was lying on the coffee table. I looked around, confused. When I went to sleep, the overhead light was on my pillow, and blanket was still on my bed. I sat up on the couch and rubbed the sleep from my eyes. I had been exhausted, and there was a good chance I was sleepwalking. It wouldn't be a huge leap to think I turned off the light and made sleeping on the couch a more pleasant experience. I would like to think that if it were a case of me sleepwalking, I would have just gone to bed. Then again, if I was going to believe that I was sleepwalking, I would have to concede that I also put my keys in the freezer while doing so. My sleepwalking explanation was getting thinner by the moment. When I pulled the blanket back, the cold air in the room crashed into my body. It was only then that I realized that I had stripped down to my underwear. The pajamas I was wearing when I came to the couch were lying folded on the floor. I sat up and pulled the blanket around my shoulders. The familiar feeling of fear was starting to crawl up my spine, and in an instant it was gone, replaced by an almost serene feeling. I let out a sigh. Thank you. I needed a decent night's sleep, I said to Elizabeth, without looking back at her. Had she audibly replied, I don't know what I would have done. Luckily for me, she remained silent. By mid-afternoon, I had decided that I needed to get out of my house. Maybe I would go out for dinner or something, or just needed to get out of there for a while. The problem was that every time I thought about leaving, fear would creep its way up my spine and burrow into my mind. After what felt like hours of this, I declared to my living room that I needed a drink. After getting dressed, I made my way to the door. But the moment I laid my hand on the knob, a combined wave of terror and nausea hit me. I could feel the sweat beading on my forehead. It was like standing on the edge of some high cliff, knowing that I had to jump and also knowing that only certain death awaited me. Never in my life had I felt that kind of fear. Only through sheer force of will was I able to push my way into the hall. It was all I could do not to run to the front door like I was being chased by hell itself. Once I was comfortably behind the wheel of my car, the fear began to fade. The adrenaline was still coursing through my system, but I no longer felt like the world was going to end at any moment. I drove around for a while, listening to music and waiting for my insides to stop vibrating. When I felt more like myself again, I went to a sandwich shop and had a light dinner, then headed across the street to pick up a bottle of whiskey. If it didn't stop the nightmares and prevent another sleepless night, it would at least make it easier to deal with. By the time I stepped through my front door, I was relaxed and in better spirits than I had been in ages. After putting the whiskey in the freezer for later, I headed to my bedroom to change into something more comfortable. I was on vacation, after all. I was starting to believe that last night had been a fluke. All of the strange things that happened could all be the product of exhaustion of one kind or another. After clearing my head, I felt less inclined to write all of this off to a ghost in a painting. If I were to really believe that, I would have to do my best to remain rational. The urge to jump to conclusions about the origins of all of my issues were getting stronger. About halfway through my living room, I stopped. Something wasn't right. I sniffed the air and my nostrils were filled with the smell of smoke. It was like going outside in a rural area on a winter evening. A distant but definite smell of burning wood hung in the air. Under the familiar smell of smoke was something metallic. It smelled like a handful of old change, or more accurately, a nosebleed. I willed myself to not think about the combined smell of fire and blood. I tried my hardest not to picture the place of execution from my dreams. I failed. I looked up at Elizabeth, and one of my preconceived notions about reality went out the window. All of my doubts were washed away. All I could do in that moment was stare at the painting. I gasped and put my hand out to steady me against the wall. The sharp intake of breath was held prisoner in my chest, along with the scream that was fighting to escape. Fear closed my throat like a hangman's rope. All I could do was gape at the image before me. Elizabeth's head was bowed, her hair a simmering waterfall throwing back reflections of flame. Smoke swirled behind her as she lifted her gaze to lock eyes with me. The defiant smile that I had grown so accustomed to was gone. It had been replaced with a genuine, if wolfish grin. I could see her slightly yellow teeth now. Her expression was equal parts victorious warrior and satisfied lover. I could see her shoulders heaving as she took slow, deep breaths. As she studied me, her expression softened. Her smile was sweet, but her eyes told a different story. She opened her mouth to speak. Smoke escaped her lips, and my world went black. The nightmare came in flashes. I was attending a sermon. The footmen entered the small sanctuary as the parish priest ended the sermon with a list of names of accused witches. My name would be on that list, I had no doubt. Fear was so thick in the room that I could smell it. It was vibrating inside me. The fear was invigorating. We were led by footmen and angry parishioners to the killing ground. Wails, pleas, and sobs drown out the incantation I whisper, my smile never faltering. I knew this day would come. They force me to watch as they behead the others. Members of my own coven and unpopular citizens fall bloody on the dirt. I can feel the energy they release in death flow into me. My senses are heightened. My entire body is in a state of arousal. I continue my nearly silent chant. Everything is going according to plan. They strip me bare in the center of the circle. The priest reads out my list of crimes. Most are true. Others are falsehoods. But the list is incomplete. They tie me to the stake. The footmen grope and slap me. I retain my composure. They find evidence of my physical arousal and spit on me. They are disgusted, infuriated, and in a killing frenzy. My neighbors, former lovers, and supposed friends hurl insults at me. I am called a litany of things. Satan's whore and child killer are the most repeated. The fire burns at my feet, and I make eye contact with each parishioner in turn. I continue my incantation in my mind, focusing on each syllable. My soul widens as they look away from me. Then comes the pain. It starts at my feet and slowly climbs up my legs. The skin on my shins blisters, splits, and blackens. I want to scream but refuse to give the satisfaction. I focus harder on the spell. Their fields and wounds will be barren soon, but I have to finish what I started. Time seems to slow as the fire chars my thighs. Tongues of flame replace the heat in my loins with searing pain. The scent of my own burning flesh and smoke from the wood flood my nose. I can feel the heat from the fire in my throat and lungs. Each breath is a new world of agony. My tongue sticks to the roof of my mouth. My entire existence is pain. I hold my composure until my lungs shrivel and I finally die. I look down upon the charred remains, still lashed to the stake. As I hover above the killing ground, I can see what they cannot. Small tendrils of oily blackness snaking out from the body that served me so well. They seep into the ground and slide unnoticed into the wombs of every woman in the parish. As I died, so shall they. I push myself up from the floor. I don't know how much time has passed, but I feel the familiar panic bred by this nightmare. I get to my feet slowly, and the smell of smoke fills my nostrils. I look over to the painting and see that the frame is smoldering, and tongues of flame are just starting to lick the canvas. Elizabeth was gone from the painting. All that remained was a charred wooden stake wrapped in broken and blackened rope. I stood there, frozen in fear, the nightmare in front of me all but overshadowing the other for the time being. The flames were spreading quickly, climbing the wall and licking the ceiling. I rushed to the cabinet under the kitchen sink for the fire extinguisher. As I pulled the small wooden door open, the handle was ripped from my hand and it slammed shut. I tried again to open it, but it wouldn't budge. "Go and you may live," I heard over my shoulder. Her voice was melodic and her accent was thick. I didn't have to turn to see who had spoken, but I had to see her. I had to know. Elizabeth's icy blue eyes stared into me. She had been captivating on canvas, but now she was a sight to behold. She was wreathed in flame, the grey of her robe only serving to accentuate the blue of her eyes and the vibrant red flush of her cheeks. I was at once terrified and enchanted by her. She was more a work of art standing before me than she had been in the painting on my wall. Slowly, my fear faded and a warm comfort replaced it. A wave of calm washed over me. It started at my head and traveled down, my thoughts going in circles, my heart rate slowed, my muscles relaxed, and I finally felt like I was able to force my limbs to move. I took a careful step forward just to test the waters. I looked up at Elizabeth, and she gave me a brief smile and an encouraging nod before pointing toward my door. In that moment, I wanted to stay in the apartment with her. The comfort she gave me was more than worth braving the flames. I had never loved another person so much in my life. She had me fully under her spell, and I was prepared to stay in that apartment and burn to be near her. As if on cue, the fire alarm sounded, breaking my trance and allowing me to escape. As soon as I made it to my car, I was all but crushed under waves of panic and sadness. I drove away as the building was being excavated, and the rest of the afternoon is a blur. It was late when I could finally go back into my apartment. Luckily, no one was hurt and the fire caused minimum damage. The wall where the painting hung was charred and the top of the couch was scorched. In the end, the sprinkler system did more damage to my apartment than the fire. The painting itself was almost completely destroyed. All that remained was a charred piece of frame about the size of a beer can. The vines looked wilted, and if this fragment contained any of the mystical sigils, they were gone. That piece of burnt mahogany is my prized possession now. I never dreamed of the mountain of the stake, nor did I ever see Elizabeth in my home again. Like the painting that held her spirit, she is gone. I've tried to rationalize the whole thing, but still cannot. After all these years of searching, I have found what I was looking for. Elizabeth may have committed atrocities hundreds of years ago, but I will always remember her for the gift she gave me that afternoon. Wow. Great story, Yeti. Don't worry. Been there, done that. It's a nice song sung by a group of minstrels known as the Eagles. They sang a song about a witchy woman. The song holds true. Witches be burning. That was a horrible, horrible analogy, I know. I won't do that again. But hope that doesn't take away from the great stories that we've been hearing. And don't forget, we have a poll up so that you can vote on your favorite story from Whispers in the Walls. And the winners of that poll, the top 3, will be adapted into radio plays and shall be performed on Count Drahoon's feature of fights. So be sure to check that out on the Tennessee Horror News page. And be sure to join me next week for another friend of mine, Mr. Dan Lee, and his story, Noir. Oh, it's probably going to be some French words. Yeti, I'm sorry, I'm not that good with Scandinavian. I'm Slavic-esque, sort of, so I'm good with that, good with Germanic stuff, not so much with Scandinavian. My English is also debatable, so the French is making me nervous. But we're going to do it. It's going to be fun. Looking forward to it, Dan. And unfortunately, that's all the time I have for this week's Spooks and Spookettes. But like I said, we shall return for part 4 next week of Whispers in the Walls. Until then, always remember that as far as things go, when things go bump in the night, there are such things.